Hello, welcome back to another video. Please consider giving us a like. Let's get started. Sherlock Holmes and the Curious Case of Mr. Hargrave, Chapter 1, The Golden Hand Society. It was on a brisk October morning in the year 1887 that the adventure truly began. I had been seated by the fire at our comfortable quarters on Baker Street, enjoying the quietness of the hour and the soothing aroma of my coffee. Holmes, as was often his habit, was buried in one of his many chemical experiments, his keen eyes focused on a glass beaker, from which a faint blue smoke was rising. The morning's Post and a collection of newspapers lay unopened on the table for when Holmes had the scent of an intellectual pursuit. All else was forgotten. We had not long been at our respective occupations when a brisk knock at the door announced the arrival of a visitor, Mrs. Hudson. Our long-suffering landlady ushered in a most remarkable figure, a stout gentleman, perhaps in his late 40s, whose face was rendered striking by a mane of bright golden hair. His expression was one of deep anxiety, and as he removed his hat and gloves, I noted the trembling of his hands. "This is Mr. J.Z. Hargrave," Mrs. Hudson announced before retreating into the safety of her kitchen. "Pray take a seat, Mr. Hargrave," said Holmes, waving a hand toward a chair. "Your distress is evident, and I trust that Dr. Watson and I may be of some assistance. Please proceed with your story." The gentleman settled himself, though he seemed somewhat embarrassed by the scrutiny of Holmes's piercing gray eyes. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he began, "I find myself in a most unusual and troubling situation, one that I could never have anticipated. It concerns a society to which I was until recently a member of the Golden Hand Society." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "Golden Hand Society. A curious name indeed, sir. The society was, as it claimed, an organization created for men of distinctive golden hair such as my own. About 2 months ago, I saw an advertisement in the newspaper offering employment. To men of this particular characteristic, it promised good pay, $4 a week, and required nothing more than the copying of pages from an encyclopedia for a few hours each day. "And you applied?" asked Holmes, leaning forward with interest. "I did, sir. My assistant at the pawn shop I run, Vincent Spaulding, had spotted the advertisement and urged me to respond. He was quite insistent, saying it was an opportunity not to be missed. The pay was more than generous for the little work required. So I applied at the address provided and was accepted without much ado." Holmes steepled his fingers. "And what precisely did this employment entail?" "Each morning I would report to Asmall office at the address in the advertisement. There I was shown to a desk and provided with volumes of an encyclopedia to copy by hand. There was no one else in the room save the clerk, who oversaw my work. This continued for 8 weeks without interruption. Then yesterday I arrived at the office to find it locked and a sign on the door reading, 'The Golden Hand Society is dissolved.'" Holmes's eyes gleamed with curiosity. "And what prompted you to seek my assistance, Mr. Hargrave?" "Well, sir," Hargrave said, shifting uncomfortably, "the entire affair now seems rather peculiar. Why would a society pay me so handsomely for such a mundane task only to dissolve without notice? And there is another matter that troubles me. My assistant Spaulding seemed far too eager for me to take this job. It is almost as though he wished me to be absent from the pawn shop." Holmes rose and began to pace the room, his hands clasped behind his back. "Your instincts, Mr. Hargrave, are sound. The circumstances are indeed most unusual, and I suspect there is more to this matter than meets the eye. Tell me where. Is your pawn shop located on Sherlock Street near the City and Suburban Bank?" Holmes halted abruptly. "City and Suburban Bank, you say? Interesting, very interesting indeed, Watson. I believe this warrants our immediate attention. Mr. Hargrave, you merely upon to uncover the truth behind your curious society." With that, the stage was set, and we prepared to follow the threads of a mystery that would prove as thrilling as it was sinister. Little did I know, as I donned my coat and hat, that this case would lead us into the heart of one of the most cunning schemes we had yet encountered. Chapter 2. The Pawn Shop. And the pawn shop, the assistant. The following day, Sherlock Holmes and I set out for Sherlock Street to visit Mr. J.Z. Hargrave's pawn shop. The air was crisp, and a thin mist lingered over London's bustling streets as we made our way through the maze of carriages, pedestrians, and street vendors. Holmes was in excellent spirits, his keen mind evidently engaged by the peculiar details of the case. Serg Street itself was an unremarkable lane of modest shops and lodgings, though its proximity to the city and suburban bank lent it a certain air of importance. Mr. Hargrave's establishment was a small, tidy shop, with a weathered sign reading, "Hargrave and Company Pawnbrokers," hanging above the door. Inside the shop was dimly lit, its shelves crowded with the usual array of second-hand goods, watches, jewelry, musical instruments, and the occasional peculiar trinket. Behind the counter stood a man who immediately drew my attention. He was short, stocky, and clean-shaven, with a bald head that gleamed under the flickering gaslight. His manner was brisk but deferential, and his sharp eyes darted about the room as though noting every detail. "Good day, gentlemen," he said, bowing slightly. "You must be the visitors," Mr. Hargrave mentioned. "My name is Vincent Spaulding. How may I assist you?" Holmes regarded Spaulding with an expression of polite indifference, though I could see his sharp eyes taking in every feature of the man. "Indeed, Mr. Spaulding," he said. "Understand you encouraged Mr. Hargrave to join the Golden Hand Society. A most interesting organization by all accounts." Spaulding smiled, though there was a hint of weariness in his expression. It seemed like a fine opportunity for Mr. Hargrave, sir, for a week, for a few hours' work. Who wouldn't take it? A shame it ended so abruptly. "Quite," said Holmes. He glanced around the shop, his gaze lingering on a patch of floor near the counter. "And how have things been at the shop during Mr. Hargrave's absence? I trust you have managed well enough." "Oh, yes, sir," Spaulding replied, his tone cheerful. "Business has been steady, though not without its challenges. We recently had some repairs done, a leaky gas pipe, you see. But all's well." "Now a leaky gas pipe, you say?" Holmes's voice was mild, but I recognized the subtle shift in his tone that indicated interest. "And where was this repair carried out?" Spaulding gestured to "There are of the shop just there, sir. We had to pull up a few floorboards to fix it, but it's all been put back in order." Holmes nodded thoughtfully and turned to Mr. Hargrave, who had been standing quietly by the count. "Mr. Hargrave, may I have a look at the area in question? Purely a matter of curiosity. You understand?" Hargrave hesitated, glancing at Spaulding, who gave a small nod. "Of course, Mr. Holmes," Hargrave said. This way we followed. Hargrave to the rear of the shop, where a section of the floor had indeed been recently disturbed. The boards had been replaced, but the work was crude and a faint smell of earth lingered in the air. Holmes crouched down and ran his fingers over the boards, then tapped them lightly with the handle of his walking stick. "Hollow," he murmured, his expression inscrutable. "What was that, Sir?" Spaulding asked, his voice a shade too casual. "Nothing of consequence, Mr. Spaulding," Holmes replied smoothly. He straightened and dusted off his hands. "Now, Mr. Hargrave, would you be so kind as to show me the remainder of your premises?" Hargrave complied, leading us through the shop and into a small office at the back. Holmes examined every corner with meticulous care, his sharp eyes noting details that escaped my more pedestrian gaze. At last, he turned to Hargrave with a satisfied smile. "I thank you for your patience, Mr. Hargrave," he said. "You have provided me with much to consider. I believe Watson and I shall take a stroll along Serg Street to reflect upon what we have learned." We bid farewell to Hargrave and Spaulding, stepping out into the bustling street. As soon as we were out of earshot, Holmes turned to me with a gleam in his eye. "Well, Watson," he said, "the game is afoot. There is more to Mr. Spaulding than meets the eye, and I have little doubt that the dissolution of the Golden Hand Society is but the beginning of a most intriguing case. Let us see where this trail leads us." Chapter 3. The empty office. Holmes was uncharacteristically silent as we strolled down Kirk Street. His head was slightly bowed, his hands clasped behind his back, and his sharp eyes flitted from one detail of our surroundings to another. I had grown accustomed to his contemplative moods and knew better than to disturb him when his mind was engaged upon some intricate train of thought. Finally, as we reached the corner of the street, Holmes stopped abruptly. "Watson," he said, his voice low but tinged with excitement, "the pieces of this puzzle are beginning to align. The question remains whether we are dealing with a singular act of deception or a larger, more insidious scheme. And what have you deduced so far? I asked, eager to learn his thoughts. Consider the facts, he said, gesturing for me to follow him down a quieter lane. A respectable tradesman like Mr. Hargrave is drawn away from his shop by a ludicrously generous offer of employment, one that ultimately proves to be a sham. Meanwhile, his assistant, Vincent Spaulding, remains behind with ample opportunity to engage in mischief. The recently disturbed floorboards and Spaulding evasive manner suggest some subterranean activity. It would not surprise me if this case connects directly onto the neighboring premises, the bank, I exclaimed, understanding at once precisely. Watson, the CTI and Suburban Bank lies but 2 doors away, and its vaults are renowned for housing significant reserves of cash and gold. Were one to tunnel beneath Hargrave's shop, the vault would be a tempting target indeed. Holmes quickened his pace, and I struggled to keep up as he made his way to the bank. It was an imposing structure of stone and wrought iron, its facade exuding the air of solidity and security that its cantle no doubt relied upon. Holmes entered confidently, and we were soon ushered into the presence of Mr. Merriweather, the bank manager, a portly gentleman with an air of genial affability. Mr. Holmes, Merriweather said, shaking hands. This is an unexpected honor. To what do I owe the pleasure? Mr. Merriweather, Holmes replied. I fear your vault may be the target of a most audacious robbery. I would request your cooperation in verifying the security of your premises. Merriweather's jovial expression faded. A robbery, you say? Surely not. Our vault is one of the most secure in London. I do not doubt its fortifications, Holmes said. But fortifications are of little use against an enemy who approaches from beneath them. Anager looked bewildered but agreed to accompany us to the vault. We descended a narrow staircase passing through several heavy doors and iron gates until we stood within the heart of the bank's treasure chamber. The vault was a cavern room lined with iron safes and stacked with wooden crates and bags bearing the bank's insignia. Holmes walked the perimeter, slowly tapping the floor with his walking stick. At regular intervals, a tone corner of the room. His tapping produced a faintly hollow sound, and he crouched down, his expression one of intense concentration. There is a tunnel beneath this floor, he declared, and I would wager it leads directly to the pawn shop on Surg Street. Merriweather looked at you. Can't be serious. The audacity of such a scheme, it's unthinkable. Unthinkable, perhaps, but entirely plausible, Holmes replied. I recommend that we set a trap. For these criminals tonight, they will not expect their plan to be uncovered, and we shall catch them in the act. Merriweather, though shaken, agreed to Holmes's proposal. Arrangements were made for the police to assist in the operation, and Holmes and I returned to Baker Street to prepare for the evening's stakeout. As we sat by the fire that evening, I could not help but marvel at Holmes's ability to deduce so much from so little. Holmes, I said, you have uncovered conspiracy with scarcely any tangible evidence. How do you manage it, my dear Watson? He replied, a faint smile playing upon his lips. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. In this case, the clues were scattered, but not beyond comprehension. Tonight we shall see if my hypothesis is correct. Little did I know then that the events of the night would exceed even Holmes's expectations, and that the Golden Hand Society would reveal itself as a far more sinister enterprise than we had imagined. Chapter 4. A Midnight Stakeout. A midnight stakeout. It was just past 9:01 when Holmes and I arrived at the City and Suburban Bank, ready to commence our midnight vigil. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional clatter of a hansom cab or the faint echo of distant laughter. Merriweather, the bank manager, met us at the entrance, his earlier affability replaced by an air of nervous determination. I must say, Mr. Holmes, Merriweather began as he led us down to the vault. This whole affair feels most extraordinary. The idea that criminals would dare to tunnel beneath my bank, it beggars belief. Yet it is precisely this audacity that makes their scheme so dangerous. Holmes replied calmly, these men rely on the assumption that such a plan would appear too far-fetched to be real. It is our duty to prove them wrong. The vault was much as we had left it earlier that day, its iron walls and locked safes exuding an air of impenetrable security. Holmes had arranged for 2 police constables, both plain-clothed, to join us in the chamber. They stood silently by the door, their presence ending a sense of gravity. To the proceedings, Holmes himself seemed almost languid, as he seated himself upon a crate near the center of the room. "It is a matter of patience," now he said, striking a match. To light his pipe, "Our adversaries will act under cover of darkness, confident in their secrecy. All we must do is wait for several hours." The vault remained utterly silent, save for the faint ticking of a pocket watch in Merryweather's waistcoat. My own nerves, though steady, were beginning to fray under the oppressive stillness. Holmes, however, appeared entirely unperturbed, his sharp features illuminated by the faint glow of his pipe. It was nearing midnight when Holmes suddenly straightened in, his keen ears catching something I could not yet hear. He raised a finger to his lips, motioning for silence. A moment later I heard it too, a faint scraping noise, as though someone were moving earth and stone. "They coming," Holmes whispered, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Stay close, Watson, and be ready to act." The sound grew louder, accompanied by the occasional muffled thud. Then, without warning, a section of the vault floor began to shift. A thin crack appeared in the stone, widening slowly until a piece of the floor was lifted away, revealing a dark hole beneath a man's head. Emerged from the opening, his face illuminated by the dim light of a lantern he carried. It was Vincent Spaulding. Holmes sprang to his feet, his voice ringing with authority. "That will do, Mr. Spaulding, or should I say John Clay, your game is up, Spaulding." Or John Clay, as Holmes had called him, froze, his expression shifting from surprise to cold calculation. He glanced at the vault's occupants, clearly assessing his chances of escape. Behind him, another figure began to emerge from the tunnel back into the hole. Clay barked this accomplice, but it was too late. The police constable seized both men before they could retreat, dragging them fully into the vault. The second man, a burly fellow with a sullen expression, offered no resistance, but Clay's face twisted into a wry smile. "Well played, Mr. Holmes," he said, dusting off his coat as though the circumstances were merely inconvenient. "I'd heard of your reputation, but I confess I did not expect you to best me quite so handily." Holmes regarded him with a mixture of amusement and disdain. "Your arrogance was your downfall. Mr. Clay, a simpler scheme might succeeded, but you overreached as the constable secured the day." Prisoners Merryweather examined the tunnel with a mixture of awe and horror. "This is astounding," he said. "They've dug all the way from Hargrave's pawn shop. The sheer effort required. How did you deduce it?" "Mr. Holmes," Holmes smiled faintly. "Observation. An inference, Mr. Merryweather. The disturbed floorboards at the pawn shop, the proximity of the bank, and the suspicious behavior of Mr. Spaulding all pointed to the same conclusion. Once the facts aligned, thereist was elementary Clay, now shackled." Chuckled softly. "You may have won this round, Mr. Holmes, but the game is never truly over. We shall see." Holmes replied, his tone cool for now. "The law will take its course," as the prisoners were led away. I could not help but marvel at Holmes's brilliance. What had begun as a seemingly trivial case had revealed itself as a plot of remarkable cunning, thwarted by the relentless logic and sharp intellect of my friend. The night air was crisp as we emerged from the bank, and Holmes' Sever was already lost, thought his mind undoubtedly turning to the next mystery that awaited him. Chapter 5: Uncovering the Depths. Uncovering the Depths. The arrest of Vincent Spaulding revealed as the notorious criminal John Clay, and his accomplice had brought the central players of the plot into custody, but the matter was far from over. Sherlock Holmes was never content with merely apprehending the guilty. He sought to uncover every layer of their schemes, leaving no detail unexplored. The following morning, Holmes, Mr. Merryweather, and I returned to the vault, now a scene of fascination for the bank staff. The trapdoor in the floor leading to the tunnel remained open, exposing the sinister pathway that had nearly led to the bank's ruin. A police inspector stood nearby, his notebook in hand, as Holmes prepared to descend into the tunnel. "It is essential, Watson," Holmes remarked, as he secured a lantern, "to understand the full scope of our adversary's operations. A tunnel of this magnitude is no small undertaking, and it is unlikely these men acted entirely alone. Do you believe there are more conspirators? I asked. Not necessarily, Holmes replied, stepping carefully into the opening. But we must examine the route they took, the tools they used, and any evidence they left behind. Such details often reveal the true brilliance or folly of a criminal enterprise. With some trepidation, I followed Holmes into the tunnel. The damp earth walls pressing in around us, the air was heavy and stale, carrying the faint scent of soil and sweat. The passage was narrow, scarcely wide enough for a man to crawl through, and reinforced with wooden beams to prevent collapse. It was a marvel of crude engineering, extending in a straight line toward the pawn shop. Street remarkable, Holmes muttered, examining the tool marks on the walls. This was the work of skilled hands, though not without haste. The diggers were clearly pressed for time, yet they managed to construct a passage capable of supporting itself. He knelt to inspect a discarded spade, its blade worn and dulled, standard equipment likely procured from a nearby tradesman. These men operated with precision, but their arrogance betrayed them. They believed no one would suspect their activities as we continued the tunnel, sloped upward, ending beneath a trapdoor that opened into the back room of Hargrave's pawn shop. Holmes paused before ascending, his keen eyes scanning the area. Note the care they took to conceal their work, he said, gesturing to the trapdoor, which had been designed to blend seamlessly with the floorboards. Above, had Mr. Hargrave not involved us, they might have succeeded once inside the pawn shop. Holmes began a meticulous examination of the room. The disturbed floorboards, the faint traces of mud on the walls, and the faint scent of oil all told a story. To his discerning eye, they work primarily at night. Holmes deduced, using the pawn shop, of the staging ground. Spaulding's insistence on Hargrave joining the Golden Hand Society was a master stroke of misdirection, ensuring the shop would remain unoccupied during the day. Mr. Hargrave, who had joined us upon hearing of our arrival, looked crestfallen. To think I trusted that man, he said. Spaulding Clay, I suppose I should call him, seemed so earnest, so eager to assist. Criminals of Clay's caliber often mask their true intentions with a veneer of respectability, Holmes replied. It is their ability to appear trustworthy that allows them to succeed. Holmes's search led him to a small ledger tucked away beneath the counter. He examined it closely, his brow furrowing, curious. He murmured, "This ledger contains a record of pawn items, yet certain entries are marked with a discrete symbol, a circle with a slash through it. Watson, do you recall the crates in the bank?" "VA, I do." I said. They were marked with similar symbols. Precisely this symbol represents a code one used to identify goods intended for smuggling or illicit trade. It appears our Mr. Clay had other enterprises beyond tunneling. Holmes handed the ledger to the police inspector, who examined it with growing alarm. This could be evidence of his smuggling ring, the inspector said. "We shall investigate further. It would be wise," Holmes agreed. Clay's tunnel may have been his boldest scheme, but it is unlikely to have been his only one. The Golden Hand Society 4. Uncovering the depths, the arrest of Vincent Spaulding revealed as the notorious criminal John Clay, and his accomplice had brought the central players of the plot into custody. But the matter was far from over. Sherlock Holmes was never content with merely apprehending the guilty. He sought to uncover every layer of their schemes, leaving no detail unexplored. The following morning, Holmes, Mr. Merriweather, and I returned to the vault, now a scene of fascination for the bank staff. The trapdoor in the floor leading to the tunnel remained open, exposing the sinister pathway that had nearly led to the bank's ruin. A police inspector stood nearby, his notebook in hand, as Holmes prepared to descend into the tunnel. "It is essential," Watson, Holmes remarked, as he secured a lantern, "to understand the full scope of our adversary's operations. A tunnel of this magnitude is no small undertaking, and it is unlikely these men acted entirely alone." "Do you believe there are more conspirators?" I asked. "Not necessarily," Holmes replied, stepping carefully into the opening. "But we must examine the route they took, the tools they used, and any evidence they left behind. Such details often reveal the true brilliance or folly of a criminal enterprise." With some trepidation, I followed Holmes into the tunnel. The damp earth walls pressing in around us, the air was heavy and stale, carrying the faint scent of soil and sweat. The passage was narrow, scarcely wide enough for a man to crawl through, and reinforced with wooden beams to prevent collapse. It was a marvel of crude engineering, extending in a straight line toward the pawn shop. "Street remarkable," Holmes muttered, examining the tool marks on the walls. This was the work of skilled hands, though not without haste. The diggers were clearly pressed for time, yet they managed to construct a passage capable of supporting itself. He knelt to inspect a discarded spade, its blade worn and dulled, standard equipment likely procured from a nearby tradesman. These men operated with precision, but their arrogance betrayed them. They believed no one would suspect their activities as we continued the tunnel, sloped upward, ending beneath a trapdoor that opened into the back room of Hargrave's pawn shop. Holmes paused before ascending, his keen eyes scanning the area. "Note the care they took to conceal their work," he said, gesturing to the trapdoor, which had been designed to blend seamlessly with the floorboards. Above, had Mr. Hargrave not involved us, they might have succeeded once inside the pawn shop. Holmes began a meticulous examination of the room. The disturbed floorboards, the faint traces of mud on the walls, and the faint scent of oil all told a story. To his discerning eye, they worked primarily at night, Holmes deduced, using the pawn shop of the staging ground. Spaulding's insistence on Hargrave joining the Golden Hand Society was a master stroke of misdirection, ensuring the shop would remain unoccupied during the day. Mr. Hargrave, who had joined us upon hearing of our arrival, looked crestfallen. "To think I trusted that man," he said. "Spaulding Clay, I suppose I should call him, seemed so earnest, so eager to assist. Criminals of Clay's caliber often mask their true intentions with a veneer of respectability," Holmes replied. "It is their ability to appear trustworthy that allows them to succeed." Holmes's search led him to a small ledger tucked away beneath the counter. He examined it closely, his brow furrowing. "Curious," he murmured. "This ledger contains a record of pawn items, yet certain entries are marked with a discrete symbol, a circle with a slash through it. Watson, do you recall the crates in the bank?" "VA. I do," I said. "They were marked with similar symbols. Precisely, this symbol represents a code one used to identify goods intended for smuggling or illicit trade. It appears our Mr. Clay had other enterprises beyond tunneling." Holmes handed the ledger to the police inspector, who examined it with growing alarm. "This could be evidence of a smuggling ring," the inspector said. "We shall investigate further. It would be wise," Holmes agreed. "Clay's tunnel may have been his boldest scheme, but it is unlikely to have been his only one. The Golden Hand Society, for instance, may have served as a front for other activities. A thorough inquiry will likely reveal more." With that, Holmes turned to Mr. Hargrave, who appeared both relieved and disheartened. "Your misfortune, Mr. Hargrave, was to employ a man of extraordinary cunning, but take comfort in knowing his plans have been thwarted, and your shop can once again serve honest customers as we left Kirk Street." Holmes seemed unusually contemplative. "It is fascinating, Watson," he said, "how a single thread, when pulled, can unravel an entire tapestry." Chapter 6. The web tightens. A fortnight had passed since the capture of John Clay and his accomplice, and the investigation into their audacious scheme had yielded unexpected revelations. Holmes's instincts, as always, had proven correct. The tunnel beneath Hargrave's pawn shop was merely the surface of a more complex plot, and the coded ledger uncovered in the shop hinted at a criminal enterprise spanning far beyond London. On a brisk November morning, Holmes and I sat in our familiar quarters at Baker Street discussing the developments. A fresh bundle of new newspapers lay on the table. Their headlines are buzz with tales of the thwarted bank robbery. Holmes, however, was disinclined to rest on his laurels. "The true test of intellect," Watson here marked, leaning back in his chair with his pipe in hand, "is not merely in catching one's quarry, but in comprehending the full extent of their intentions." Clay's scheme to rob the City and Suburban Bank was bold, but it was no isolated. The Golden Hand Society, ostensibly ruse, may yet prove to be the nexus of a far-reaching conspiracy. As if summoned by Holmes's musings, a knock came at the door, and Mrs. Hudson entered to announce the arrival of Inspector Elrad. Of Scotland Yard, the inspector, a wiry man with a non-nonsense air, entered with a sheath of papers under his arm. "Morning, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, taking the chair Holmes offered. "We've been digging into that ledger you uncovered at Hargrave's shop. It's open quite the can of worms indeed." Holmes said, his eyes brightening. "What have you discovered?" Laid the papers on the table and tapped them with his finger. "Smuggling, forgery, and illegal trade. That ledger lists not only pawned items, but also shipments of contraband jewels, art, even rare artifacts. It seems Clay wasn't just a thief, but the leader of all well-organized syndicate. The Golden Hand Society was likely a front to launder goods and recruit unwitting accomplices." Holmes nodded. "The symbols in the ledger correspond to shipments." "I presume they do," confirmed. "Each symbol matches a crate or package. We've since traced to warehouses across London. We've made several arrests, but the scale of the operation is staggering." "Fascinating," Holmes murmured, steepling his fingers. "And yet the question remains, who financed Clay's ventures? Smuggling on such a scale requires capital, contacts, and influence." Clay, though clever, was but a cog in a larger machine. Hesitated. "We've uncovered a name, one that keeps cropping up in connection with the shipments and the Golden Hand Society. A man named Marsh. He's a reclusive figure, but he owns several warehouses and has ties to trade routes across Europe." Holmes's expression sharpened. "Marsh I have encountered that name before, though I can't recall the particulars. What have you learned of him?" "Not much," Lerad admitted. "He keeps to himself. Rarely seen in public, but we've traced a shipment from one of his warehouses to the very tunnel Clay was digging. It seems Marsh was supplying Clay with tools and materials." Holmes rose, his energy renewed. "This is the connection I've been seeking. Watson, fetch your coat, Estrad. I believe it's time we paid Mr. Marsh a visit later." That day we arrived at the sprawling estate of Marsh, situated on the outskirts of London. The house, though grand, had an air of neglect, its windows shuttered and its grounds overgrown. A sullen butler answered the door and led us to Marsh's study, a dimly lit room filled with heavy furniture and an overwhelming sense of secrecy. Marsh himself was a thin, sharp-featured man. With a cold, calculating gaze, he greeted us with a forced politeness, though it was clear he resented our intrusion. "Mr. Holmes, Inspector Elrad, Dr. Watson," he said, gesturing. "For us to sit. Oh, what do I owe the pleasure?" Holmes wasted no time. "Mr. Marsh, your name has been linked to the Golden Hand Society and the activities of John Clay. I believe you financed his operations and provided the means for his attempted bank robbery." Marsh's expression did not change. A serious accusation. "Mr. Holmes, do you have evidence?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Not yet, but I will. Your warehouses, your trade routes, and your connections to Clay suggest a deep involvement. The ledger from Hargrave's shop provides enough to warrant further investigation." Marsh leaned back in his chair, his steely gaze unflinching. "You are welcome to investigate, gentlemen. You will find nothing." As we left the estate, Holmes's mood was contemplative. "Marsh is a formidable opponent, Watson," he said, "but his composure betrays him. He knows we are close to the truth, and that knowledge will be his undoing. Doing the game is not yet over." I could see in Holmes's determined expression that Marsh, for all his confidence, had underestimated the man who now pursued him. Chapter 7. The game is won. 2 days after our visit to Marsh's estate, Holmes sat by the fire at 221B Baker Street. A faint smile playing on his lips. It was a smile I recognized well, one that foretold the conclusion of a case. I haven't seen him this animated since the arrest of John Clay, and I suspected he had uncovered the means to ensnare Marsh in his web of deceit. "Watson," he said at last, "our adversary is a clever one, but even the most cunning of criminals cannot escape their own hubris. Marsh, for all his cold precision, has made a critical error. Elrad will join us shortly, and we shall put an end to this matter tonight." "What have you discovered?" I asked eagerly. Holmes rose and retrieved a map from the mantel, spreading it across the table. "This," he said, pointing to a marked location near the Temps, "is Marsh's private warehouse. It serves as the nerve center for his smuggling operations, while his estate is kept pristine. His true dealings occur here in the shadow, "And you believe he will be there tonight?" I asked. "I do," Holmes replied. "Marsh, like all men of his ilk, operates on routine. A shipment of contraband is dueto, arrive under cover of darkness. Marsh will undoubtedly oversee its transfer. Confident that his operations remain unseen, Lawrad, and his men will surround the warehouse while we gather the evidence to confront him." Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door, and Elrad entered, his expression one of grim determination. "We're ready, Mr. Holmes. My men are stationed nearby, awaiting your signal." Holmes nodded. "Then let us waste no time tonight. We shall end the Golden Hand Society." The warehouse was a dark, hulking structure by the water's edge, its windows shuttered, and its entrances guarded by burly men who moved with the precision of seasoned criminals. Lads constables hidden in the shadows waited silently as Holmes and I crept closer. Holmes motioned for silence and led us to a side door which he opened with a slender tool from his coat. Inside, the air was heavy with a scent of oil, and damp wood stacks of crates filled the room, each bearing the same coded symbols we had seen in the ledger lanterns hung from beams. Casting flickering light over the scene, voices echoed from a chamber deeper within the warehouse. Holmes gestured for us to follow, and we moved carefully toward the sound. There, in a large open space, stood Wirt Marsh, flanked by several of his men. Was examining a ledger while issuing orders in a low, commanding voice. Holmes stepped forward, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Mr. Marsh, I believe your smuggling operation has reached its conclusion." Marsh froze, his cold eyes narrowing. Ash turned to face us. "Holmes," he said, his voice steady but tinged with annoyance, "I warned you that your interference would yield nothing, and yet here we are." Holmes replied, his tone even. "The evidence is all around us. The coded crates, the contraband, shipments, and your own presence here tonight if you would." At Holmes's signal, the constables burst into the room, their whistles shrieking as they rounded up Marsh's men. Marsh himself made no attempt to flee, but stood with an air of resigned contempt. "You may have disrupted my operations, Mr. Holmes," he said, coolly, "but you will find no traceable connection, Tome. My hands are clean. On the contrary," Holmes said, stepping closer, "your hands are dirtier than you care to admit. The ledger you hold contains the very proof you seek to deny entries in your own hand detailing shipments and payments. It will serve as the crown jewel of your conviction." Marsh's composure faltered, his lips tightening as he realized his error. The ledger in his own meticulous handwriting was indeed damning. Lawrad, now holding the incriminating document, nodded. "This will do nicely, Mr. Holmes. Marsh, you're under arrest," as the constables led Marsh and his men away. Holmes turned to me with a satisfied smile. "Another piece of the puzzle falls into place, Watson. The Golden Hand Society was not merely a front for Clay's schemes, but a cornerstone of Marsh's empire. Its dissolution marks the end of their reach." Later, as we sat by the fire at Baker Street, Holmes reflected on the case. "What fascinates me, Watson, is the audacity of men like Marsh and Clay. They build castles of deception, each layer designed to shield the truth, yet in the end a single thread, a hollow floor, a coded ledger is enough to unravel it all, and once again your deductions have prevailed," I said. Holmes smiled faintly. "The truth, Watson, is a patient companion. It waits to be found, and when it is, it shines brighter than any lie. Now let us turn our minds to the next mystery, for the world is never short of them." And with that, the case of the Golden Hand Society came to its rightful conclusion, another triumph for my remarkable friend Sherlock Holmes. The end. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked the story. If you did, please consider subscribing to my channel. I put a lot of effort and dedication in writing these stories. See you in the next video.